I still remember the 7 words my mother whispered, sharp enough to snap my youth in half. "Don't come home. Your sister doesn't want trouble." I thought that pain would end with a lonely dinner, until strangers offered me a seat. Years later, at my wedding, my uninvited parents learned the cruelest truth. I had not sought revenge. I had simply replaced them. They arrived not to apologize, but to demand the one thing that froze the entire ceremony in silence. My name is Madison Hudson. I am 33 years old, and up until 3 days before Thanksgiving, I still believed that competence in the boardroom translated to value in the living room. I work as a senior project manager at Juniper and Slate Media in downtown Seattle. My job is to control variables. I manage timelines. I soothe nervous clients. And I ensure that when a crisis hits, I am the one with the extinguisher. I have a corner office with a view of the Sound, a credit score that hovers near perfection, and a life that looks impeccable on paper, but looking at my phone on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, none of that mattered. I was staring at a half-packed suitcase on the floor of my apartment. I had bought gifts. I had wrapped a cashmere scarf for my mother and a vintage vinyl record for my father. I had even bought a gift card for Kelsey, my younger sister, because cash felt too impersonal, but picking out an actual item for her was a minefield I had stopped trying to cross years ago. The phone rang. The screen displayed Mom. I swiped right, already smiling. I was going to ask if she needed me to pick up cranberry sauce from the specific market she liked in Connecticut. "Hello." "Mom," I said, "I am just finishing up work. My flight lands at—" "Don't," she said. The single word was not a shout. It was a wall. It was the same tone she used when she told a solicitor to remove her number from their list. "Excuse me?" I asked. Freezing. My hand was hovering over a stack of files I needed to lock away before the holiday. "Don't come home, Madison." The air in my office seemed to thin out, making it hard to breathe. I sat down in my ergonomic chair, the leather creaking loudly in the silence. "Mom, I have a ticket. I have non-refundable bookings." "What are you talking about? Is Dad okay?" "Your father is fine," she said, her voice brisk. "Efficient. It is Kelsey. She does not want the drama." I blinked, looking at the gray rain streaking against the glass. Drama? I live 3,000 miles away. I have not seen any of you in 11 months. I pay my own bills. I do not ask for money. What drama could I possibly be bringing? "See," she said, and I could hear the sharp intake of breath on the other end. "You are doing it right now. You always make everything into a big production. Kelsey is going through a very fragile time right now. She is stressed about her career. She is sensitive. Having you there, flaunting your fancy Seattle life. It is just going to set her off. We need a peaceful holiday." I felt the old, familiar shame rise up my throat, acidic and hot. It was the shame of being too much, and yet never enough. I am not flaunting anything, I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound professional. I just wanted to have dinner with my family. It is not a good year for that, she said. Maybe Christmas, or next summer. Just cancel the flight. Madison, do it for the family. She hung up. I sat there, holding the phone against my ear, listening to the dead air. I needed to fix this. That was my instinct. Fix the timeline. Mitigate the risk. I dialed my father. Gordon. He answered on the 4th ring. I could hear the television in the background, the familiar drone of the sports channel. Hey, Dad, I said. Maddie, he said. His voice was low, guarded. Mom just called me. She said, I cannot come home. Dad, tell me this is a joke. Tell me you want to see me. There was a pause. A long, heavy pause, where I waited for him to be the father I had read about in books, the protector who would stand up and say that his eldest daughter had a seat at his table. Listen to your mother, Maddie, he said finally. Dad, please. She is just trying to keep the peace. You know how Kelsey gets. If she is upset, the whole house is miserable. Just give it time. Do not push it. He hung up too. I lowered the phone and looked at the black screen. It was happening again. Suddenly, I was 17 years old again. I was sitting at my own birthday party in the backyard, watching my mother pop the balloons she had just inflated, because Kelsey was crying in her bedroom about a boy who had not texted her back. The party was canceled. We could not celebrate while Kelsey was grieving. My mother had said, I remember eating my cake alone in the kitchen, silently, so the fork would not clink against the plate and disturb the mourning period for a 2-week relationship. I flashed forward to my college graduation. I was standing in my gown, scanning the crowd, sweating in the sun. They arrived 45 minutes late. Missing my name being called, Kelsey had an emergency appointment. My dad had explained later, avoiding my eyes. She thought she had a migraine. We had to stop. Every time I spoke up, every time I said, that hurts, or that is unfair, I was labeled, you are too sensitive. Madison, you are so dramatic. Madison, why can you not just be the bigger person? Madison. I looked at the airline app on my phone. The ticket from Seattle to Hartford was $450. Non-refundable. Economy plus. For the first time in 33 years. I did not feel the urge to cry. I felt a cold, hard clarity settling in my chest, like concrete hardening. I was not being rejected because I had done something wrong. I was being rejected because my role in the family was not daughter. My role was scapegoat. I was the vessel into which they poured all their tension so that they could remain intact. If I was the problem, then they did not have to look at Kelsey's failures or their own enabling. I was the sacrifice that kept their dysfunctional ecosystem balanced. I stood up and walked to the window. The city of Seattle lay below me, wet and gray and alive. I had built a life here. I had friends who respected me. I had a team that looked up to me. I had a home that I paid for with my own money. Why was I begging for a seat at a table where I was only served scraps? I looked at the suitcase. I was not going to unpack it, but I was not going to Connecticut either. I picked up my phone and opened the messaging app. I was about to text my mother, to tell her that she did not have to worry, that I was done trying. But a new message popped up. It was from Kelsey. It was just 5 words. "Don't make this hard for Mom." I stared at the text. It was strange. Usually, when I was excluded, Kelsey would send something passive-aggressive, something like, "Hope you are having fun in the rain," or a photo of her and Mom drinking wine. She thrived on the victory. But this? "Don't make this hard for Mom." There was no gloating. There was fear. Why was she afraid of me coming home? Why was drama the excuse? It felt like a flimsy shield hiding something heavier. I thought about the last time I saw them, how Kelsey had quickly closed a laptop when I walked into the room. I thought about the way Dad looked tired, more tired than a man his age should look. I did not reply. I did not ask why. I swiped the message away and powered down the phone completely. I tossed it onto the sofa. The silence in my apartment was absolute. For the first time, it did not feel lonely. It felt safe. I walked over to the suitcase and zipped it shut. Not because I was going anywhere, but because I was closing a chapter. "I am done," I said aloud to the empty room. "I am done asking for permission to exist in my own family. I am done apologizing for taking up space. If they do not want me at the table, I will simply pick a different table." I walked to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and took out a bottle of wine. I poured a glass, sat down on my floor, and watched the rain wash the city clean. I did not know it yet, but by closing that door, I had just opened the one that would lead me to the truth they were so desperate to hide. The phone lay black and silent on the cushion. The open loop of Kelsey's fear lingered in the air. But for tonight, I let it be. I took a sip of wine. "Happy Thanksgiving, Madison," I whispered. Thanksgiving morning arrived not with the smell of roasting turkey, but with the hollow, deafening silence of my apartment. I woke up at 9 o'clock to the sound of rain drumming against the window pane, a rhythm that usually soothed me, but today felt like a countdown to absolutely nothing. Through the thin drywall that separated my living room from Unit 4B, I could hear the neighbors. There was the distinct clatter of heavy pots hitting burner grates, the sound of a football game buzzing on a television, and laughter, easy, unforced laughter that vibrated through the floorboards and settled into the dust of my empty hallway. I stayed in bed for an hour, staring at the ceiling, playing a dangerous game of chicken with my phone. I knew I should not look. I knew that opening social media was an act of emotional self-harm. Yet, my thumb hovered over the icon with a will of its own. I tapped the screen. It was the first thing on my feed. Of course it was. My mother was efficient with her image management. It was a professional quality photo, likely taken by a neighbor. They were standing on the front porch of the house in Connecticut. framed by the rustic wreath I had sent them 2 years ago. My father, Gordon, had his hand resting on Kelsey's shoulder. My mother, Denise, was beaming, looking radiant in a cream-colored sweater that I knew she would spill gravy on later. Kelsey looked fragile and precious in the center, the protected jewel of the family. There was no gap in the line. There was no awkward space where I should have been standing. They had closed ranks perfectly. The quotient read, "Family first, so grateful for this peace." I felt a physical blow to my chest, breathless and sharp. It was not the exclusion that hurt the most. It was the erasure. They did not just leave me out. They had curated a reality where I did not even exist to be missed. I threw the phone across the duvet. I refused to cry in bed. That felt too much like a surrender. I forced myself up. I showered, scrubbing my skin until it was pink, and put on my heavy wool coat. I was not going to sit in my pajamas and eat cereal. If I was going to be alone, I would be alone in public, where the noise of other people's lives could drown out the silence in my head. The streets of Seattle were slick with oil and rain. Most shops were dark, their windows displaying closed signs, but I knew a place that never closed. The Harbor Lantern Bistro was a staple in the neighborhood, a place with dark wood paneling, brass fixtures, and a menu that had not changed in 20 years. I pushed open the heavy oak door and was immediately hit by a wall of warmth. The air smelled of sage, roasted poultry, yeast rolls, and expensive red wine. The dining room was packed. It was a sea of families, fathers carving turkeys, mothers wiping toddler faces, grandparents clinking glasses. I walked to the hostess stand. The young woman looked at me, her eyes darting to the empty space behind me. "Just one?" she asked. "Just one," I said, keeping my chin high. She led me through the maze of tables, past the laughter and the toasts, to a small two-top tucked near the kitchen swing door. It was the table you gave to someone you wanted to forget. I sat down, my back against the drafty wall, and unfolded the stiff white napkin. Right next to me, separated only by a thin aisle, was a large round table that seemed to vibrate with energy. It was a massive family, 3 generations deep. There was an older couple anchoring the group, a woman with short, stylish silver hair and bright eyes, and a man with a beard that looked like white wire wool. Next to them sat a younger couple, clearly their son and daughter-in-law, and a few others I could not place. They were passing platters of food with a chaotic, practiced rhythm. "Pass the potatoes. Ethan, before I starve to death," the younger woman said, laughing. The older woman, the matriarch, slapped the hand of the older man as he reached for a third roll. "Frank, leave some for the rest of us." I tried to tune them out. I focused on my menu. I ordered the turkey dinner because ordering anything else felt like admitting defeat. When the plate arrived, it looked perfect. Mound of mashed potatoes, pool of gravy, thick slices of meat. I picked up my fork. I cut a piece of turkey. I lifted it to my mouth, but I could not chew. The lump in my throat had calcified into something hard and impassable. I sat there, fork hovering, surrounded by the hum of connection. feeling severed from the entire human race. I blinked, just once, to clear my vision. But it was a mistake, a single. Treacherous tear escaped and slid down my cheek, landing silently on the rim of the white plate. I quickly reached for my water glass to hide my face, but I was not fast enough. "Excuse me," a voice hid. I froze. I turned my head. The older woman from the next table, Joan, I would learn later, was leaning across the aisle. She was not looking at me with pity, which is what I expected. She was looking at me with a piercing, maternal assessment. "It is a crime to eat dry turkey alone," she said. Her voice was not a whisper, it was a statement of fact. I wiped my cheek, mortified. "I am fine," I said, my voice cracking humiliatingly on the last word. I have a lot on my mind. Please, enjoy your meal." She ignored my dismissal entirely. She turned to the man with the white beard. "Frank, squeeze over." I shook my head, panic rising. "No, please. I do not want to intrude. I am really okay. I have work to do on my phone." Frank looked at me. He had kind eyes, crinkled at the corners from decades of smiling. "Listen to her," he said, gesturing to his wife. "She once made a mailman come in for lasagna because he looked chilly. You are not safe from her. Besides, we need someone to settle a bet about whether cranberry sauce should come from a can or a The younger man, Ethan, kicked a chair out from their table. "Just come over," he said easily. "We have too much food. Lydia ordered enough for an army." It wasn't the politeness that broke me. It was the casualness of it. They were not treating me like a charity case. They were treating me like a neighbor who had just wandered in late. I looked at my lonely plate. Then I looked at the empty chair they had opened up between Joan and Frank. I stood up. My legs felt unsteady. I picked up my wine glass and took the 3 steps across the aisle. When I sat down, the warmth of the group hit me instantly. It was physical. Joan immediately put a fresh roll on a side plate and set it in front of me. "I am Madison," I whispered, feeling like an imposter. "I am Joan." She said, "This is Frank. That loudmouth is Ethan, and the patient saint next to him is Lydia." Frank raised his glass. "Welcome, Madison." I looked around the circle of faces. Strangers. People who owed me nothing. People who did not know my history, my failures, or the fact that my own mother considered me a liability to her holiday peace. For the first time all day, the knot in my chest loosened. Joan looked at me, her eyes locking onto mine. "There," she said softly, pouring a little more wine into my glass. "Now the table looks right. A table is not full until everyone has a seat." I took a breath, inhaling the scent of butter and sage and strangers who felt strangely like safety. I was still Madison Hudson. I was still the daughter who was told not to come home. But as I picked up my fork, I realized that for this one meal, I was not the girl eating alone in the corner. I was just Madison. And there was a place set for me. The noise of the restaurant had settled into a low, comfortable hum, the kind that usually signals the end of a meal when belts are loosened and coffee is ordered. My plate was empty, save for the rosemary sprig I had been shredding with my fingernail. I felt a strange, heavy fatigue. The crash that comes after an adrenaline spike of sheer panic. Joan leaned her elbows on the table, clasping her hands together. She did not look at the rest of her family. She looked only at me. "You are not okay," she said. It was not a question. It was a calibration. I opened my mouth to recite the corporate script I had perfected over a decade. I wanted to say that work was stressful, or that the weather was getting to me, or that I was just tired, but looking at her gray eyes, which seemed to hold a terrifying amount of intelligence, the script evaporated. "My mother called me 3 days ago," I said, my voice barely rising above the clatter of silverware. "She told me not to come home for the holiday. She said my sister did not want the drama." The table went quiet. Ethan stopped chewing. Lydia put down her wine glass. Joan did not gasp. She did not cover her mouth in performative shock. She just narrowed her eyes slightly, like a mechanic listening to a rattling engine. "I see," she said. I felt the need to defend them, a reflex that was as old as my spine. "It is complicated. My sister is going through a lot, and my mom just wants to keep the peace. I am probably just overreacting. I usually do." Joan hummed, a low sound in her throat. She took a sip of water. "I worked as a senior legal specialist in family and civil court for 30 years. Madison," she said. "I was not a lawyer, but I was the one who read the files before the lawyers did. I read the emails, the transcripts, the depositions." She set the glass down. "I know what a boundary looks like," she continued, "and I know what manipulation looks like. Telling a daughter she is drama so she stays away is not about keeping the peace. It is about controlling the narrative." The words hit me hard. Controlling the narrative. It was exactly what I did at my job every day. I managed the story so the client would not panic. Was that what my mother was doing? Was I just a PR crisis she was trying to bury? Before I could spiral. The energy at the table shifted. It was abrupt and intentional. "Okay, that is enough heavy lifting for one night," Ethan said, clapping his hands. "We have a crisis of our own. We have half a pecan pie left, and if it goes home with us, I will eat it at 2 a.m, and Lydia will leave me." Lydia laughed. A bright, genuine sound. "It is true. I will leave him. Madison, you have to take it." I blinked, disoriented by the pivot. "Oh, no. I could not. We insist," Lydia said. She was already flagging down a waiter for a box. "And we are putting some stuffing in there too. And turkey. Do you like dark meat?" I walked out of the Harbor Lantern Bistro 10 minutes later, carrying a paper bag heavy with food I had not ordered, and a heart that felt confusingly light. There was no transaction. They did not ask for my number. They did not ask for a favor. They just fed me. But as I reached the door, Joan had touched my arm. "We do Sunday dinner at 5 o'clock," she had said. "Every week. House is in Magnolia." She pressed a napkin into my hand. It had an address scrawled on it in blue ink. I spent the next 3 days staring at that napkin. It sat on my kitchen counter like a threat. My brain, wired for transactional relationships, could not process it. Why would they want a stranger in their house? Was this a charity project? Was I the stray dog they found in the rain? The thought made my skin crawl. I did not want pity. I wanted to belong, but not if the price was my dignity. I ate the leftover pecan pie standing over my sink on Friday night. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. By Sunday afternoon, I had decided not to go. It was safer to stay in my apartment, safer to be alone than to be the awkward guest who did not get the inside jokes. Then, at 2 o'clock, my phone rang. It was a local number. I answered cautiously. "The roast is going in the oven." Joan's voice came through, crisp and clear. I froze. I haven't decided if I can make it." I stammered. "I am not asking for a decision," she said. "I am just telling you the timeline. We eat at 5. If you come, the chair is there. If you don't, we will have extra leftovers for Ethan." She hung up before I could say sorry. She did not beg. She did not guilt trip. She gave me the agency to choose, and that single act of respect was what made me grab my keys. The drive to Magnolia took 20 minutes. It was a neighborhood of old money and established trees, where the houses looked like they had been growing out of the earth for 100 years. I pulled up to the address on the napkin. It was a beautiful craftsman house with a wide porch and a paint job that had seen better days but was loved nonetheless. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I felt like I was walking into a job interview for a position I was unqualified for. I knocked. The door swung open instantly. It was Frank. He was wearing a faded Mariners baseball cap and a sweater that had a hole in the elbow. "You made it," he said, smiling. "Come in. Wipe your feet. The dog tracks mud everywhere." I stepped inside. The house smelled of garlic, rosemary, and old wood. It was cluttered in a way that felt embraceable. Stacks of books on the stairs, coats piled on the rack, photos covering every inch of the hallway walls. I braced myself for the questions. I expected them to sit me down and ask, "So, why do your parents hate you? What did you do?" Instead, Joan walked out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "Good. You are here," she said. "Here." She tossed something at me. I caught it reflexively. It was a green apron. Lydia is useless with a knife, and Ethan is watching the game. I need someone to chop the carrots and celery. "Do you know how to dice?" Yes, I said, stunned. "Then get to work." She turned her back and went to the stove. That was it. No interrogation. No pity. I was not a guest to be entertained. I was a pair of hands to be utilized. And strangely, that was exactly what I needed. I stood at the butcher block island, next to Joan, chopping carrots into uniform cubes. The rhythm of the knife hitting the wood was grounding. Around us, the family swirled in a chaotic orbit. Ethan and Lydia were arguing in the living room about which actor had played the best Batman. It was obviously Christian Bale. Lydia shouted, "You are delusional!" Ethan yelled back. It was Keaton. Keaton had the jawline. Joan rolled her eyes as she stirred the gravy. They have been having this argument for 6 years. She told me, neither of them is right. I laughed. It just bubbled up out of me. For the next 2 hours, I learned what a family felt like. It was not the tense, curated silence I grew up with, where every word had to be measured for potential fallout. It was messy. It was loud. People interrupted each other. Frank stole a piece of celery from my pile and winked. I realized I was not acting. I was not trying to be the good daughter or the successful project manager. I was just chopping vegetables. At dinner, the conversation flowed over me like warm water. They asked me about my job, about living in Seattle, about my favorite books. When I spoke, they listened. Nobody cut me off. Nobody told me I was being dramatic. As I was helping clear the table, I looked up and caught Frank staring at me. He was sitting in his armchair, holding a cup of coffee. He was not smiling. He was looking at me with a profound, unsettling intensity. It was not the look of a stranger. It was the look of someone trying to solve a puzzle. His eyes traced the line of my jaw, then moved to my hands as I stacked the plates. It felt familiar. That look, it felt like he knew something about me that I did not know myself. "Everything okay?" "Frank?" I asked, pausing. He blinked, snapping out of his trance. The easy smile returned, but it did not quite reach his eyes this time. "Fine," he said, just thinking. "You remind me of someone I used to know. A long time ago." "Who?" I asked. He shook his head, taking a sip of his coffee. "No one important. Just a ghost." He turned back to the television, but the air around him remained heavy. I carried the plates to the kitchen. The warmth of the evening suddenly chilled by a draft I could not locate. I was part of the family now, seated at the table, but I had the distinct, prickly sensation that my presence here was not entirely a coincidence. The winter months in Seattle usually meant grayness, but that year, my life began to take on a color I had never seen before. It was the color of stability. And a large part of that stability came in the form of a man named Noah Palmer. Noah was Joan and Frank's nephew, the youngest of the cousins, and a civil engineer by trade. He did not sweep into my life with flowers or grand declarations. He arrived with a toolbox and a distinct lack of patience for broken things. We met formally on my second Sunday dinner, where we ended up debating the structural integrity of the Space Needle for 45 minutes while washing dishes. I liked him because he did not try to save me, When I told him about a bad day, he did not offer pity. He offered logic. He was a man of concrete and steel. Someone who believed that if a foundation was cracking, you did not cover it with a rug. You dug it up and poured new cement. One Tuesday evening, he was driving me to a hardware store because I had decided to install floating shelves. "You are going to use the wrong anchors," he said, keeping his eyes on the rain-slicked road. "I am not," I replied. Looking out the window, I watched a YouTube tutorial. He laughed, a dry, low sound that vibrated in the small cabin of his truck. YouTube does not account for the plaster walls in your building. Madison, you will put a book on that shelf, and it will rip a hole in your living room. I will buy the anchors. You just pick the wood. That was Noah. He showed up. He texted me at noon, just to send a picture of a sandwich he thought looked suspicious. He sat next to me on Joan's porch in comfortable silence when my social battery ran out. He was the first man I had ever known who did not need me to perform happiness to make him feel comfortable. While my personal life was finding its footing, my professional life at Juniper and Slate Media was soaring. I had just closed the biggest project of the quarter, a rebranding campaign for a tech firm that had been notoriously difficult. My boss, a woman who rarely smiled, had called me into her office and offered me a promotion to senior director for the first time in 33 years. I looked in the mirror and saw someone valuable. I did not need Gordon to tell me he was proud. I did not need Denise to approve of my salary. I was doing this alone, and I was doing it well. But gravity has a way of asserting itself just when you think you are flying. It happened on a Thursday night. I was sitting on my sofa, laptop open, feeling the high of my new title. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was an email notification. Alert. New credit inquiry and account opening. I frowned. I was obsessive about my finances. I knew every penny that went in and out. I picked up the phone, assuming it was a glitch or a phishing scam. I opened the banking app. There, glowing in red pixels, was a notification. A line of credit had been opened at a furniture outlet in Hartford, Connecticut. The initial charge was for $2,500. Hartford. My stomach dropped so fast, I felt dizzy. I lived 3,000 miles away from Hartford. I had not been to Connecticut in over a year, but I knew 2 people who lived 20 minutes away from that specific furniture store. My hands started to shake. I stared at the screen. $2,500. It had to be a mistake. Identity theft happened to everyone, right? It was just a coincidence that the thief was shopping in my parents' zip code. I grabbed my keys and my laptop. I did not know where else to go. I drove to Magnolia. When I walked into Joan's house, I did not knock. I just stood in the entryway, pale and breathless. Joan was in the living room reading a book. She took one look at my face and closed the cover. "Kitchen," she said immediately. 5 minutes later, I was sitting at the table with Joan and Frank. Noah was leaning against the counter, his arms crossed, his face dark. I showed them the email. It was opened yesterday. I said, my voice trembling, In Hartford. Someone used my social security number. Someone used my maiden name, not the hyphenated professional name I use out here. Joan put on her reading glasses. She didn't look at the emotional side of it. She looked at the data. Hartford. She muttered. Date of opening. January 14th. Status. Approved. She looked up at me. Madison. Did you authorize anyone to use your credit? Did you ever sign a power of attorney for your parents? No, never. I said, I moved out when I was 22. I cut financial ties immediately. Frank was sitting opposite me, staring at the wood grain of the table. He looked uncomfortable. He kept shifting in his chair, rubbing the back of his neck. It might just be a hacker, I said, trying to convince myself. Just a random hacker who happens to be in Connecticut. Frank made a sound. It was a scoff, almost involuntary. It is not a hacker. Maddie, Frank said quietly. I looked at him. What do you mean? Frank looked up, and for a second, his eyes were full of a strange, guilty sorrow. Your parents usually do paperwork like that when they are pressed for cash, he said. The room went dead silent. The air conditioner hummed. The fridge cycled on, but the humans in the room were frozen. What did you say? I whispered. Frank's face went pale. He realized what he had done. He looked at Joan, panic in his eyes. Joan closed her eyes briefly, a look of resignation crossing her face. Frank, I said, my voice rising. What do you mean, usually? How do you know how my parents do paperwork? He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine. Joan reached out and covered my hand with hers. Her grip was iron strong. Frank used to work in the same district as your father, years ago, she said, her voice steady but cautious. Before we retired, before you were born. Actually, they knew each other. I pulled my hand away. You know them? I asked, looking between the two of them. You knew who I was when I walked into the restaurant. We knew of them, Joan corrected. We did not know you were their daughter until you told us your last name was Hudson, and you were from Connecticut. Frank put it together later. I felt betrayed. I felt like the floor was dissolving. Why didn't you tell me? Because it does not matter. Noah cut in. His voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. I turned to him. Of course it matters. No, it doesn't, Noah said, walking over to the table. He pulled out a chair and sat next to me. Joan and Frank did not help you because they knew your dad. They helped you because you were crying into a plate of turkey. They didn't say anything because they wanted you to have a fresh start. I looked at Frank. He looked miserable. Your father has a history of creative financing, Frank said, choosing his words carefully. I saw it back in the day. He borrows against things he shouldn't. I thought he had stopped. I am sorry. Maddie, I shouldn't have said anything. I sat back, my mind racing. The pieces were slamming together with the force of a train wreck. The call, the warning, Don't come home. They said it was because Kelsey didn't want drama. They said it was because I was too sensitive. But if I had gone home for Thanksgiving, I might have seen the mail. I might have seen a credit card statement lying on the counter. I might have answered the phone when a collection agency called. They did not ban me to protect Kelsey's feelings. They banned me to protect their crime. My God, I whispered. They are using my name. I looked at the laptop screen again. $2,500 was just the beginning. If they had this card, what else did they have? A mortgage? A car loan? I felt sick. I felt violated in a way that was worse than physical. They had stolen my name. The one thing I had built for myself. I need to fix this. I said, standing up, I need to call the police. I need to call the bank. Joan stood up too. You need a paper trail. Madison, you cannot just call and scream. You need proof. You need to see exactly what has been signed and whose handwriting is on it. You need the original documents. I can't get the original documents. I said, pacing the kitchen. They are in Connecticut. Then we get the digital copies. Noah said. I looked at him. He was already pulling his phone out. We go to a credit bureau, Noah said. We do a full forensic audit of your history. We find every single account linked to your social. And if we have to, we go to the store that opened this card and demand the signature file. I can't ask you to do that. I said, this is my mess. Noah looked at me. His expression was calm, solid, unshakable. You are not asking, he said. I am offering. I can drive you, if you want. He did not say, I will save you. He said, if you want. I looked at the three of them. Joan, the strategist, Frank, the unwilling witness, and Noah, the anchor. I realized then that my parents had not just stolen my money. They had stolen my trust. But these people, these strangers who had pulled up a chair for me, were trying to give it back. Okay, I said, my voice steadying. Let's check the records. I sat back down. The romantic notion of a family reunion was dead. The investigation had begun, and for the first time then, I wasn't the victim waiting to be sacrificed. I was the prosecutor preparing my case. It had been 18 months since the night I ate turkey alone and found a family in the process. The seasons had cycled through gray rain, brief, blinding summer, and back to gray again. But the cold did not bite as deep as it used to. On a Friday evening, Noah drove us to the Harbor Lantern Bistro. He did not say why, but he was wearing a shirt that had been ironed with a level of precision that suggested Joan had been involved. We sat at the same table where I had once sat crying, the small two-top near the kitchen, but this time I was not facing a wall. I was facing him. The dinner was normal. We talked about his latest site inspection in Bellevue and my upcoming budget meeting. But when the plates were cleared, Noah did not ask for the check. He put his hands on the table, palms flat against the wood, grounding himself. Madison, he said. I looked up. His face was serious. stripped of his usual dry humor. "This is the place where you were pulled out of the corner," he said. "It is the place where the seating chart changed." I smiled, though my heart began to thud a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. "I remember," I said. He reached into his pocket. There was no velvet box, no theatrical production for the other diners to applaud. He simply placed a ring on the table. It was gold, simple, with a small, clear stone that caught the candlelight. It looked solid. It looked like something that would survive a storm. "I am not going to promise you a fairy tale," Noah said, looking me dead in the eye. "I know life is heavy. I know your past is heavy. I am not promising it will be easy." He took a breath. "I promise that I will choose you," he said. "Every single morning, I will choose you over the noise, over the drama, and over the silence." I stared at the ring. "I will choose you." It was the antithesis of my entire childhood. I had spent 30 years begging to be chosen, auditioning for love that was conditional on my utility. Noah was offering it as a default setting. "Yes," I whispered. My voice was steady. "Yes." He slid the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. He did not ask how I knew it would fit. I suspected Lydia had raided my jewelry box weeks ago. We walked out into the cool Seattle night, hand in hand, feeling invincible, but the invincibility lasted exactly 48 hours. It crashed the moment I opened a wedding planning website on Sunday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen island, a mug of coffee in hand, scrolling through invitation templates. They were beautiful, elegant fonts, heavy cardstock, gold foil borders, but every single template began with the same traditional line: Mr. and Mrs. Gordon Hudson. Request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their daughter. I stared at the screen. The cursor blinked at the end of my father's name. I could not type it. If I put their names on the invitation, I was lying. I was presenting a fiction to the world, pretending that Gordon and Denise were supportive, loving parents who were ushering me into my new life. It would be a performance, just like the family photos where everyone smiled while Kelsey pinched my arm. But if I left them off, if I wrote together with their families, or just our names, it was a public declaration of estrangement. It was inviting questions. Cousins would whisper, aunts would call. The judgment of the world, which loves to shame daughters for leaving, would come down on me. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking. The shadow of my parents, even from 3,000 miles away, was long enough to darken my kitchen. I drove to Magnolia. I needed Joan. She was in the garden, pruning hydrangeas with violent efficiency. She saw my face and put down the shears. "Porch," she said. "Lemonade, now." 5 minutes later, I poured out the dilemma. I told her about the templates. I told her about the guilt that was gnawing at my stomach, the feeling that I was being a bad daughter, by erasing them from the one day that was supposed to matter. Joan listened, rocking slowly in her wicker chair. She waited until I had run out of words. "Madison," she said. "Look at me." I looked at her. "Do you want your wedding to tell the true story of your life? Or do you want it to tell a story that makes strangers feel comfortable?" I gripped my glass. "I want the truth," I said, "but the truth looks ugly." "Joan, the truth is that my parents are not paying for this. They are not happy for me. They probably do not even know I am engaged. Then why give them the headline?" she asked. "The invitation is not a legal summons. It is an introduction to your future. If they did not build the foundation, they do not get to put their name on the building." She leaned forward. "It is your day," she said firmly. "The only people who need to be comfortable are you and the man standing next to you. If anyone asks where your parents are, you tell them the truth. They are exactly where they chose to be." "Away," I exhaled, a long, shuddering breath. She was right. I went home and reopened the laptop. I deleted the template. I chose a new design. Madison Hudson and Noah Palmer invite you to share in their joy. No parents, no hierarchy, just us. That evening, Noah came over with takeout and a map. "I have an idea," he said, spreading the map on the coffee table. "I do not want a big church wedding." I said immediately, "I do not want to walk down a long aisle with hundreds of eyes on my back, wondering why my father is not walking me." "I know," Noah said. He pointed to a spot in California. "Sonoma County. There is a small vineyard. It is quiet. It is private. The air smells like earth and grapes. We can rent the whole place. Just 50 people. Just the ones who actually know us." I looked at the map. It felt like an escape. It felt like a sanctuary. "Let's do it," I said. But while we were planning a future built on light and grapes, the past was busy digging a tunnel under our feet. I had taken Joan's advice from months ago seriously. I had not just disputed the one credit card account in Hartford. I had hired a forensic credit monitoring service to do a deep dive into my entire financial history. I wanted to know if there were any other cracks in the floorboards. The report arrived on a Tuesday, 2 weeks after the proposal. I opened the secure PDF file. It was 20 pages long. I skipped the first few pages of standard data: my student loans, my car payments, my current credit cards. I scrolled down to the section labeled Historical Associations and Guarantor Links. My breath hitched. There were 5 accounts listed. One was a car loan from 7 years ago, taken out in my father's name, but with me listed as a co-signer. I had never signed a car loan for my father. Another was a utilities account for an apartment Kelsey had lived in during college. My name was listed as guarantor. A third was a personal loan for $10,000, taken out 4 years ago. It was marked paid in full, but my name was attached to it as secondary liability. And I sat frozen in my chair. They hadn't just stolen my identity recently. They had been using me as a financial safety net for the better part of a decade. I understood suddenly why they had always kept me at arm's length, but never fully cut me off. They needed me. But they did not need me for love or companionship. They needed my credit score. I was their backup plan. I was the pristine name they could attach to their messy financial lives, to get approved for loans they could not get on their own. That was why my mother had panicked when I said I was coming home. That was why they called me drama. If I came home, if I saw a piece of mail, or if I tried to buy a house and realized my debt-to-income ratio was skewed, the game would be over. I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. It was different from the hurt I felt at Thanksgiving. This was not emotional abandonment. This was theft. I picked up the phone and called Noah. He answered on the first ring. "Hey, fiancé, we need to talk," I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. "I got the report." "Is it bad?" he asked. "It is systematic," I said. "They have been using me as a guarantor for years." "Noah, I am not a daughter to them. I am a co-signer." There was a silence on the line. Then Noah spoke, his voice hard as steel. "Bring the papers to Jones," he said. "We are not just fixing this. Madison, we are going to close every single door they have left open." I hung up. I looked at the ring on my finger, the symbol of being chosen. Then I looked at the report, the evidence of being used. The wedding in Sonoma was going to be beautiful, but before I could walk down that aisle, I had to make sure that the people who gave me life could no longer mortgage my future. Silence is a fragile thing. You build it brick by brick, creating a wall to keep out the noise of the past, but all it takes is a single vibration of a phone to bring the whole structure crashing down. It started with a text message on a Tuesday afternoon. The name on the screen was Kelsey. I had not heard from my sister in nearly 2 years. I stared at the notification, feeling that old, familiar phantom ache in my chest, like a bone that had broken and healed crooked. "Heard you are getting married. Call Mom." I did not reply. I put the phone face down on my desk and tried to focus on the budget spreadsheet for the Q3 projections. How did they know? I had been careful. My social media was locked down. The wedding website was password protected. But secrets in a family like mine are like water. They always find a crack to leak through. Perhaps a cousin I had forgotten to block, or a mutual acquaintance from high school who had seen the registry. 10 minutes later, the phone began to ring. "Mom." I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. "Mom." I declined the call. It rang a third time. The persistence was not born of affection. It was born of panic. Control was slipping away from her, and Denise Hudson did not handle a piece of control with grace. Finally, the phone stopped buzzing. A notification popped up. New voicemail. I waited until I was home, safe behind the deadbolt of my apartment, before I listened to it. Noah was not there. He was at a site inspection in Tacoma. It was just me and the recorded voice of the woman who gave birth to me. "How dare you?" "Madison." Her voice was shrill, distorted by the poor connection. "I hear from Aunt Linda that you are engaged, and I have to find out from a third party? We are your family. You do not just cut us out of the biggest day of your life. Call me back, immediately. There was no congratulations. There was no, I am happy for you. There was only the outrage of a manager who had been left out of a meeting. I deleted the voicemail. I did not call back. I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the Seattle rain wash against the glass. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I had the luxury of distance. I was wrong. The next evening there was a knock on my door. It was not the polite tap of a neighbor or the rhythmic knock of a delivery driver. It was a heavy, authoritative pounding. I walked to the door, my heart hammering a warning rhythm against my ribs. I looked through the peephole. The hallway light was dim, but I recognized the coat. It was a beige trench coat, belted tightly at the waist. I recognized the hair, dyed a stiff, motionless blonde. It was Denise. I unlocked the door and opened it. I did not open it wide. I stood in the threshold, blocking the entrance. My mother stood there, wet from the rain, her face flushed with the exertion of travel and rage. She looked older than I remembered. The lines around her mouth were deeper, etched by years of frowning. "You are hard to find," she said. "No hello, no hug?" "What are you doing here?" I asked. My voice was calm, which surprised me. I wasn't 17 anymore. I was 34, and I paid the mortgage on the floorboards she was standing on. I am here because my daughter is getting married and decided to forget she has parents. She snapped. She tried to push past me, assuming the old hierarchy where she moved and I yielded still applied. I did not move. She stopped, looking up at me with genuine shock. "You are not coming in," I said. "Madison, don't be ridiculous. I flew 6 hours. Let me in. State your business from the hallway," I said. She bristled, straightening her coat. "Fine. If you want to air our laundry in the hallway for your neighbors to hear, that is your choice. I want to know why I have not received an invitation. Because you are not invited," I said. Her mouth fell open. It was a theatrical expression, one I had seen 1,000 times. "You cannot do that. It is improper." "What will people say? The Caldwells are already asking questions. Aunt Linda is expecting a hotel block. I need the details. Madison, I need to know the color scheme so I can coordinate my dress. I need to know where we are sitting. I expect the front row. We have a reputation to maintain. It was always about the reputation. It was never about the relationship." I looked at her, and I felt a sudden, profound exhaustion. There is no reputation to maintain. "Mom," I said, "and there is no front row for you. But since you are here, let's talk about something else. Let's talk about the account at the furniture store in Hartford." Her eyes flickered. It was a micro-expression, a tiny twitch of the eyelid. But I saw it. The outrage vanished for a split second, replaced by calculation. "I don't know what you are talking about," she said, smoothing her lapel. "I think you do." I said, "And the car loan, and the personal loan from 4 years ago, and the utilities for Kelsey's apartment." She waved her hand dismissively. Oh, that is just adult business. Madison, you wouldn't understand the complexities of finance. We had to move some things around. It is just paperwork. It is identity theft. I said, "It is family," she hissed, her voice rising. We did what we had to do to keep the house running, to help your sister. You were doing well out here with your fancy job. You didn't need the credit. We used it for the family. So that is why you told me not to come home for Thanksgiving. I said, "It wasn't about Kelsey's drama, was it?" She scoffed. "Of course it was. Kelsey is sensitive." "No." I cut her off. You were afraid. You were afraid that if I walked into that house, I would see the mail. I would see the collection notices addressed to me. I would see the house of cards you built on my Social Security number. She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. Her silence was a confession. "Connor told me you were nosy," she muttered. "If you had come home, you would have started digging. You always make everything into an inquisition. We just needed time to pay it back." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "So you banned me from my own family holiday to cover up a felony." Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the wall near the elevator. I hadn't seen him. He had been standing back, letting her be the battering ram, just as he always did. Gordon walked into the light. My father. He looked gray. He looked like a man who had been shrinking for 20 years. "Maddie," he said softly, "please, lower your voice." I looked at him. The anger that flared up was hotter than what I felt for my mother. She was the architect, but he was the one who watched the foundation crack and did nothing. "You don't get to tell me what to do." "Dad," I said, "not anymore. Did you know?" He looked at his shoes. He shifted his weight. "Denise handles the bills," he said, "and you know that." "That is not an answer," I said, my voice echoing in the hallway. "Did you know she was signing my name to your loans?" He looked up, his eyes watery and weak. We were drowning. "Maddie, the business took a hit. Kelsey needed help. We thought you wouldn't mind helping us. You are the strong one. The strong one." The title they gave me not as a compliment, but as a burden, because I was strong. I could be used. Because I was strong. I didn't need protection. "I am not your bank," I said, "and I am not your co-signer. Here is how this is going to work." I stepped out of the doorway, closing the distance between us. "You want to talk? You want to be part of my life? Then you start with the truth. You admit everything. You give me a list of every single account you have opened in my name. You sign an affidavit admitting that those debts are yours." Denise's face twisted. "I will do no such thing. That would ruin us. The legal implications. Then you don't get a wedding invitation. I said simply. You don't get a front row seat. You don't get to play the loving parents. You get nothing. Denise stepped forward, her face turning an ugly shade of red. You ungrateful girl, she spat. After everything we sacrificed for you, you have replaced us. That is what this is. You found those people, that old couple. You replaced your own flesh and blood with strangers. I thought of Joan, who had pulled out a chair for me when I was crying. I thought of Frank, who had winked at me while I chopped vegetables. I thought of Noah, who loved me without needing to spend my credit. No, I said. My voice dropped dead quiet. I didn't replace you. I looked her in the eye. I just stopped begging for scraps. I stopped waiting for you to love me more than you love using me. These strangers treat me like a person. You treat me like a resource. I stepped back and put my hand on the doorknob. Go home, Mom. Go home, Dad. There is nothing for you here. You will regret this, Denise shouted. You need us. I looked at them one last time. A woman consumed by entitlement, and a man consumed by cowardice. I really don't. I said. I stepped inside and closed the door. I threw the deadbolt. Click. I leaned my forehead against the cold wood of the door, listening to my own breathing. I could hear Denise shouting something muffled in the hallway, and then Gordon's low voice trying to quiet her. Then silence. I slid down to the floor, my legs shaking. It wasn't the shake of fear. It was the shake of adrenaline leaving the body. I pulled my knees to my chest. I had done it. I had orphaned myself. And as the tears finally came, hot and fast, I realized they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of relief. The weight was gone. The open loop was closed. They had come to take, and for the first time in my life, I had given them absolutely nothing. The dining room table at Joan and Frank's house had ceased to be a place for Sunday roasts. It had transformed into a war room. For 3 nights straight, Joan and I sat across from each other, surrounded by stacks of paper that smelled of laser printer ink and betrayal. We were not drinking wine. We were drinking black coffee, the kind that tastes like battery acid and keeps your eyes pinned open at midnight. Joan was in her element. She was no longer the kindly grandmother who pruned hydrangeas. She was the legal specialist who had spent 30 years dissecting the lies people tell in court. Okay, let's categorize, Joan said, sliding a highlighter across the table. Column A is direct theft. Accounts opened entirely in your name. Column B is the gray zone. Accounts where you are listed as a guarantor or cosigner. We need to match every single date to your physical location. I picked up the first sheet. It was a credit card statement from a bank I had never used. Look at this, I said, pointing to the transaction history. The account was opened in October of 2012. Where were you in October of 2012? Joan asked, her pen hovering over a notepad. I was a sophomore in college. I said, I was living in a dorm in Boston. I didn't have a car. I barely had money for textbooks. Joan looked at the statement. The billing address listed is not Boston. It is 42 Maple Drive. Hartford, Connecticut, my parents' house. I felt a cold shiver trace down my spine. I remembered that October. I had called home asking for $50 to buy a winter coat because mine had ripped. My mother had told me they were tight on cash. Yet, according to this piece of paper, 3 days later, someone used this card to buy a flat-screen television at a big box store in Hartford. "It gets worse," I said, flipping the page to the digital copy of the application form we had requested. "Look at the signature." It was a digital signature, the kind you scribble on an electronic pad. It read, Madison Hudson. But the tail of the end swooped up and looped back around in a giant, childish circle. "I don't write like that." I said, "I never have. My handwriting is jagged." Joan peered at it through her reading glasses. "Who writes like that?" "Kelsey," I whispered. "She used to dot her eyes with hearts until she was 20. She thinks loops are cute." Joan didn't look surprised. She'd just made a note. Potential forgery by sibling. Investigating. We kept digging. The paper trail was a map of my family's dysfunction. Every time there was a crisis, Kelsey wrecking her car, my dad's business having a slow quarter, a vacation they couldn't afford, there was a corresponding hit on my credit. They treated my identity like a hidden savings account. They could raid whenever reality bit them. But the real horror wasn't in the past. It was in the present. I found a notification for a debt consolidation loan taken out just 6 months ago. It was for $25,000. I stared at the terms. It was a high-interest loan, the kind desperate people take. The primary borrower was listed as Denise Hudson, but then I saw the fine print on the transfer document. Secondary liability transferred to guarantor. Madison Hudson. Effective date, January 1st, 2026. I didn't sign this. I said, my voice rising. I haven't spoken to them about money in years. How can they transfer liability to me without a signature? Joan looked at the document, her face grim. They didn't need a new signature if they forged your original consent on the master agreement years ago. They are flipping the debt. Madison. They are sensing that the ship is sinking, and they are moving the cargo onto your back before they jump. We need an expert, Joan said, closing the folder. I know the law, but we need someone who knows the banking loopholes. The next morning, Noah took the day off work. He drove me downtown to a glass-walled building that looked intimidatingly expensive. We had an appointment with a forensic accountant named Mr. Vance, a man Noah had worked with on a complicated commercial dispute. Mr. Vance was a small man with sharp eyes and a tie that cost more than my first car. He listened to us for 20 minutes without interrupting, his fingers steeping together. He looked at the papers we had compiled. It is a classic straw man setup. Mr. Vance said. His voice was dry, devoid of judgment. Your parents have bad credit. Your sister likely has no credit or bad credit. You, however, have a pristine history. He pointed to the consolidation loan. Here is what is happening. They used your information to bolster their applications as a cosigner. Banks love a good cosigner. It lowers the risk. But your parents likely set up the contact information so that all alerts went to their email, not yours. You were the silent partner who didn't know she was a partner. But this $25,000? I asked. Mister. Vance nodded. This is the danger zone. The loan is currently in good standing, but barely. They have missed one payment. If they miss 2 more, the bank stops calling them and starts coming for the guarantor. That is you. He looked at me seriously. When is your wedding? 3 weeks. I said, Mr. Vance leaned back. If this loan goes into default in the next 3 weeks, the bank could freeze any assets linked to your Social Security number to recoup their losses. They could garnish your wages. They could lock your checking account. I felt the blood drain from my face. My wedding deposits. I whispered. The caterer. The venue. The final payments are due next week. If my account freezes, the checks bounce. Noah finished for me. His jaw was tight. The venue cancels. The wedding is off. Mister. Vance nodded. Exactly. It is a ticking time bomb. If your parents stop paying, either because they can't, or because they are angry at you, you lose your liquidity instantly. I sat there, feeling sick. It was a weapon, whether they intended it to be or not. They held a grenade that could blow up my life on my wedding day. If I angered them too much, if I pushed them too hard, they could just stop paying the bill and watch my world burn. So what do? I asked. Do I pay it off? I don't have $25,000 lying around. No. Mister, Vance said, do not pay a cent. If you pay, you acknowledge the debt is yours. You validate the fraud. He slid a heavy folder across the desk. You prepare a fraud affidavit packet, he said. We draft a formal dispute for every single bureau. We attach the police report. Yes, you will need to file a preliminary report, even if you don't press charges yet. We get a notarized statement that you lived in Seattle while these transactions happened in Connecticut. He looked at Noah, then back at me. You don't fire this weapon yet, he said. If you file this now, the investigation freezes the accounts. That might also freeze your assets temporarily while they sort it out. It is too risky to do 10 days before the wedding. So, I have to wait? I asked. You wait, he said. But you walk into that wedding with this folder in your hand. If they try to leverage you, if they try to threaten you, you show them this. You let them know that you have the power to send them to federal prison for wire fraud. It is your shield. We left the office in silence. The rain had stopped, but the sky was a bruised purple color. I spent the next 48 hours compiling the dossier. It was the most important project of my career. I hunted down old leases to prove my address. I printed out flight records to prove I wasn't in Connecticut. I found the IP addresses from the digital signatures, tracing them back to a residential provider in Hartford. I wasn't building a bridge. I was building a fortress. On the night before we were set to leave for Sonoma, I sat on Joan's floor. placing the final document into a crisp manila envelope. I felt heavy. A daughter shouldn't have to carry a dossier on her parents to her own wedding. Joan came in with 2 mugs of tea. She sat down on the sofa behind me. "You are angry that you have to do this," she said softly. "I am. I admitted. I am furious. I just wanted to get married. I didn't want a legal battle." Joan reached down and smoothed my hair, a gesture so tender it made my throat ache. "The truth is not a weapon. Madison," she said. "The truth is just gravity. It keeps you grounded so you don't float away into their chaos." She pointed to the envelope. "This isn't for revenge. This is for safety. On your wedding day, you need to know that if the monster comes out from under the bed, you have a flashlight to shine in its face." I sealed the envelope. I wrote, "Do not open" on the front in thick black marker. Noah walked in then. He had packed the car. He looked at the envelope, then at me. "Ready?" he asked. I stood up. I picked up the file. It felt heavy, but it also felt solid. It was the weight of my own life, reclaimed from the people who had tried to steal it. "I am ready," I said. I put the file in my bag, right next to my wedding shoes. The paper trail was complete. The evidence was undeniable. My parents might show up to the wedding thinking they held the power, thinking they could intimidate me into silence, but they didn't know that I was bringing something far more powerful than anger. I was bringing the receipts. The final proof of the wedding invitation arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. I held the heavy cream cardstock in my hands, running my thumb over the raised black ink. It was traditional in design, but radical in content. There were no ghosts on this paper. There was no mention of Gordon or Denise. Instead, right at the top, in elegant script, it read, "With love and support from Joan and Frank Palmer. Madison Hudson and Noah Palmer invite you." It was not a lie. It was an acknowledgement of who had actually done the work. They had not given me my DNA, but they had given me my life back. We had discussed adult adoption, a legal process where Joan and Frank would formally become my parents, but we decided against it. I was 34 years old. I did not need new parents on a birth certificate. I needed them in the places that actually mattered. So, instead of a courtroom, we went to a notary. We spent an afternoon signing the unsexy, terrifying documents that define what a family is in the eyes of the law. I removed Denise from my emergency contact list. If I was in a car accident, the hospital would call Noah, and then they would call Joan. I signed a medical power of attorney. If I could not speak for myself, Frank would speak for me. I updated my will, my assets. What little I had that wasn't tied up in the credit investigation would go to Noah. And then I made one final change. I filled out the petition for a name change. I was taking Noah's last name, but I was also changing my middle name. I was dropping the name Elizabeth, which was my mother's middle name, a tag she had placed on me like a brand. In its place, I wrote Palmer, Madison E. Palmer. It sounded slightly repetitive, but to me, it sounded like armor. I was literally wrapping myself in the name of the people who had saved me. 3 days before we were set to drive down to Sonoma. Frank called me into his garage. It was his sanctuary. A place that smelled of sawdust, varnish, and quiet concentration. He was standing by his workbench, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked nervous, which was unlike him. "I made you something," he said, "for the big day." He handed me a wooden box. It was made of polished cherry wood, smooth as glass, with dovetail joints that fit together perfectly. It was heavy. I ran my hand over the lid. Inset into the wood was a small brass plaque. It was engraved with a single sentence. "A seat is kept for you." I looked up at him, my throat tight. "It is for the keepsakes," Frank said, his voice gruff with emotion he was trying to suppress. "But it is also a reminder. I know you are worried about the seating chart. I know you are worried about who belongs where. This is just to say that as long as we have a table, you have a chair. You don't have to earn it. It is just kept." I didn't say anything. I just hugged him, burying my face in the rough wool of his sweater. He smelled like sawdust and safety. While I was building my fortress, the opposition was trying to storm the gates. Kelsey had moved from passive-aggressive texts to a full-blown smear campaign. My phone buzzed constantly with notifications from cousins and aunts I hadn't seen in a decade. Kelsey says, "You are banning your own mother." Kelsey says you are embarrassed by them because they aren't rich. How can you be so cruel? One text from Kelsey simply read, "You are making Mom look bad. Stop acting like a victim." I did not reply. I did not block them, because I needed the evidence in case things escalated. But I did not engage. Silence was my new language. Every time I didn't reply, I reclaimed a piece of my energy. I learned that you do not have to attend every argument you are invited to, but we knew silence wouldn't stop them from showing up. I hired security. It sounded dramatic, but it was necessary. I found a private firm that specialized in high-profile events. I didn't want bouncers in black t-shirts crossing their arms at the door. I wanted professionals in suits who looked like guests, but moved like walls. I met with the lead agent, a man named Mr. Henderson. I gave him photographs of Gordon, Denise, and Kelsey. "I don't want a scene." I told him, "If they show up, they are allowed in." "Mr." Henderson raised an eyebrow. "Allowed in?" "Usually. Clients want people kept out. If I keep them out, they will scream at the gates," I said. "They will make a scene that everyone will hear. If they come in, I can control where they sit." I tapped the photo of Denise, but they do not get near the bridal suite, and they sit in the back row. If they try to stand up during the vows, or if they try to grab a microphone, you remove them, gently, but immediately. "Understood," he said. We had one final rehearsal dinner at Joan's house. We went over the script with the master of ceremonies, a friend of Noah's who was a radio DJ. Joan was the director. "When you introduce us," she told him, pointing a spoon for emphasis, "do not say Madison's new parents. That is disrespectful to biology, you say. The people who have stood by the couple with love and support. She looked at me. We are not erasing your history. Madison, we are just clarifying the credits. We do not bash your parents. We do not make snide remarks. We stay high. They will go low, and we will stay high, because the person who screams first loses the room. Noah walked me to my car that night. The air was crisp, smelling of impending rain. He stopped me at the door and turned me to face him. I need you to know something, he said. What? If they start something, I am not going to be polite. I know. I said, no. Listen, he said. I promised I wouldn't cause a scene, but if they corner you, if they try to make you sign anything, or if they try to hurt you, I am stepping in. I am not the groom in that moment. I am the guard dog. I put my hand on his chest. I know. I said, but let me handle it first. I have been running from them my whole life. I need to stop running. He nodded, kissing my forehead. Okay, but I am right behind you. I went home and sat at my desk. The apartment was quiet. My dress was hanging on the door, a garment of white lace and hope. Next to it was the manila envelope marked "Do Not Open." I pulled out a piece of stationery. I needed to get the words out of my head so I could sleep. I wrote a letter to Gordon and Denise. I knew I would never send it. Dear Mom and Dad, I don't hate you. Hate takes too much energy, and I need all my energy for loving the people who actually showed up. I just don't have any room left for the denial. I don't have room for the version of me you created to pay your bills. She doesn't exist anymore. The Madison who was afraid of drama is dead. The woman who is getting married tomorrow is free. I folded the paper and burned it in the sink. I watched the ashes wash down the drain. I climbed into bed, finally feeling ready to close my eyes. Then, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was one single message from Denise. If you don't send the invite by morning, I am coming anyway. I know where it is, and I am bringing the papers. You have one last chance to fix this before I ruin your little party. You need to sign the transfer. Madison, or everyone will know what an ungrateful child you are. I stared at the screen. She wasn't coming for the wedding. She was coming for the signature. She was coming to secure her financial escape route before I legally bound myself to someone else. I didn't reply. I turned off the phone. Let her come. I thought, closing my eyes. I have a wooden box that says I have a seat. She has a threat. We will see which one holds more weight when the music starts. The sun over Sonoma County rose with an aggressive, golden brilliance that felt almost inappropriate for the storm I knew was brewing. It was one of those perfect Northern California mornings where the mist clings to the grapevines like white linen before burning off to reveal a sky so blue it looks painted. The air smelled of warmed earth and ripening fruit. It was the kind of day brides pray for. The kind of day that usually signals a happy ending. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the bridal suite, staring at the woman looking back at me. For 30 years, I had looked in mirrors and seen a girl who was asking a question. Am I enough? Am I worth the trouble? Do you love me now? I would adjust my posture, fix my hair, and try to mold myself into a shape that would fit into the small, jagged space my family had carved out for me. Today, the woman in the mirror was not asking anything. She was wearing white silk that draped like water over her hips. Her shoulders were back. Her eyes were dry. She looked dangerous. Joan stepped up behind me. She was wearing a navy blue dress that made her silver hair shine. She reached out and adjusted the veil, her hands steady and warm. Stop looking for the cracks, Madison, she said softly. There are none. I am not looking for cracks. I said, I am looking for the exit. Just in case. Joan turned me around, gripping my shoulders. Listen to me. Today is not a trial. You are not walking into that garden to prove to them that you survived. You are not walking out there to show them what they lost. If you do that, you are still living for them. She waited until I met her gaze. You are just walking into your own life. You are stepping across a threshold they cannot cross. That is it. I nodded, taking a shaky breath. I can do that. There was a polite knock at the door. It was not a bridesmaid. It was Mr. Henderson, the head of the security team I had hired. He was a large man in a charcoal suit who looked like he could stop a tank with a stern look. Ms. Hudson, he said, his voice low. I turned. Are they here? They are at the south gate, he said. A Mr. Gordon Hudson and a Mrs. Denise Hudson. They are demanding entry. They say they are the parents of the bride, and that there has been a mistake with the guest list. My stomach gave a violent lurch, a reflex I couldn't control. Is the sister with them? I asked. No, ma'am. Just the parents. They are agitated. The woman is threatening to call the police if we do not let her in. I looked at Joan. She didn't say a word. She just raised an eyebrow, leaving the choice to me. I could send them away. I could tell Mr. Henderson to block the gate. But if I did that, Denise would scream. She would stand at the fence and wail until every guest turned their head. She would make the narrative about her martyrdom. Let them in. I said, Mr. Henderson nodded, reaching for his earpiece. But, I added, my voice sharpening, they are to be escorted to the very back row. The last row. They are not allowed near the bridal suite. They are not allowed near the microphone. And if they stand up during the ceremony, you remove them. Understood. I walked to the window and peered through the slats of the blinds. The south gate was visible in the distance. I saw a silver sedan pull through. 2 figures got out. I saw my father first. Gordon looked smaller than I remembered, his shoulders hunched inside a suit that looked slightly too big for him. He stood by the car, looking at the ground, rubbing his hands together in that nervous tic he had. His eyes were red-rimmed. Even from this distance, he looked like a man attending a funeral. Then I saw Denise. She did not look like she was at a funeral. She looked like she was conducting an audit. She was wearing a bright floral dress that clashed with the muted earth tones of the vineyard. She was looking around, not at the beauty of the scenery, but at the infrastructure. I saw her point at the massive oak tree where the ceremony would be held. Then at the caterers setting up the wine bar. She was calculating. I knew that look. She was estimating the cost per head. She was tallying up the wealth she believed I had been hiding from her. She looked possessive, like a landlord inspecting a property she intended to reclaim. She thinks she owns this. I whispered. She owns nothing, Joan said, stepping up beside me. She is just a guest with a bad seat. Come on. It is time. The ceremony was a blur of golden light and music. I remember the moment the string quartet started playing. I walked out of the suite and saw Noah standing under the oak tree. He looked solid. He looked like the earth itself. When I reached the start of the aisle, there was a ripple of confusion in the crowd. People expected Gordon to be there. They expected the biological father to offer his arm. Instead, Frank stepped up on my left side, and Joan stepped up on my right. Frank winked at me. "Ready, kid? Ready," I said. We walked. I did not look at the back row. I kept my eyes locked on Noah. But as we passed the last row of chairs, I could feel the heat of her stare. It burned against the back of my neck. I could hear a sharp intake of breath, a noise of indignation that was quickly stifled, likely by the presence of Mr. Henderson, standing 3 feet away from her. I reached the altar. Frank kissed my cheek. Joan squeezed my hand. They sat down in the front row, the seats of honor. I married Noah Palmer. I promised to be his partner, his safe harbor, and his witness. When he kissed me, the world fell away. For a few minutes, I forgot about the dossier in my bag. I forgot about the fraud. I was just happy. We walked back up the aisle as husband and wife, showered in white rose petals. I laughed, shielding my eyes from the sun. But the peace was a temporary truce. The reception was held in a large, open-air pavilion covered in vines. Jazz music played. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne. I was standing near the head table, accepting a hug from Noah's cousin, when I felt my clutch purse vibrate. I had kept my phone on me. It was a compulsion. I needed to know if the bomb had gone off. I pulled the phone out, shielding the screen with my hand. There was a notification from my email. It was marked high priority. Subject: action required. Document awaiting signature. My blood ran cold. I opened the preview. It was a DocuSign request. The sender was a generic legal document service, but the memo line was clear. Transfer of debt, obligation and liability, release. Borrower: Denise. Hudson. I tapped the file to open the summary. It was the $25,000 loan. The one Mr. Vance had warned me about. The timestamp showed it had been generated 10 minutes ago. Denise had sent it from her phone. She was sitting 50 feet away from me, at a table in the back corner, sending me a legal contract to sign during my own wedding reception. I looked up, scanning the room. I found her. She was not eating. She was staring at me. She held her phone in her hand like a remote control. When our eyes met, she didn't smile. She tapped her phone screen, then pointed at me. The message was clear. Sign it. Sign it now, or I will make a scene. She stood up. She began to weave through the tables. Moving toward me, she was not coming to offer a toast. She was coming to close the deal. She looked determined, her jaw set, her eyes fixed on me with the terrifying focus of a predator who realizes the prey is cornered. Gordon remained seated, his head in his hands. He knew. He knew what she was doing, and he was letting it happen. I looked at Noah. He was laughing with his brother, unaware that the war had just started. I looked at the phone again. Action required. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of jasmine and expensive wine. She thought I would fold. She thought that because I was the bride, because I wanted the perfect day, I would sign my name to $25,000 of debt just to keep her quiet. She thought the social pressure of the wedding was her weapon. She was wrong. I handed my champagne glass to a passing waiter. I reached into the tote bag I had stashed under the head table. My fingers brushed against the silk of my shoes, and then closed around the thick, cool paper of the manila envelope. Mr. Vance's words rang in my head. It is your shield. I pulled the envelope out. I watched Denise get closer. She was 20 feet away, 10 feet away. She was smiling now. A tight, artificial grimace that didn't reach her eyes. She was opening her arms as if to hug me, but I knew she was going to whisper a threat in my ear. I didn't step back. I stepped forward. I walked out to the center of the dance floor, meeting her halfway. The music was still playing, a soft jazz standard, but the guests nearby stopped talking as they sensed the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure. Denise stopped. She looked confused by my advance. I held the envelope against my chest. If she wanted a stage, I would give her one, but she was not going to like the performance. The DJ tapped the microphone, a sharp sound that cut through the jazz and the murmuring of the guests. The sun had begun to dip below the horizon, painting the vineyard in strokes of violet and burnt orange. It was the golden hour, the time when photographers say everyone looks beautiful. Ladies and gentlemen, the DJ's voice boomed, warm and inviting. Before we cut the cake, the bride and groom would like to recognize the people who made this journey possible. Please, raise your glasses to the couple's rock. The people who have stood by them with unwavering love and support. Joan and Frank Palmer. The applause was instantaneous and thunderous. It was genuine affection, the kind that ripples through a room when good people are recognized. Joan and Frank stood up at the head table. Frank looked bashful, waving his hand, while Joan beamed, looking at me with pride that felt like a physical embrace. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement in the back row. Denise was standing up. She had risen halfway out of her chair the moment the DJ said, "People who made this journey possible." She had assumed, with the blind arrogance of a narcissist, that the next words would be Gordon and Denise Hudson, when the name Palmer rang out instead. She froze. She was suspended in a half-crouch, her mouth open in a smile that was rapidly curdling into shock. She sank back down, but only for a second. The humiliation was the spark. The desperation was the fuel. As the applause died down and the guests returned to their conversations, Denise moved. She didn't walk. She marched. She cut through the perimeter of the dance floor, her eyes locked on me. She looked frantic. I stepped away from the head table, moving toward a quiet alcove near the bar, where the security guard, Mr. Henderson, was discreetly stationed. I wanted this away from the cake, but I wanted it witnessed. Denise reached me, breathless. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my bicep. "Sign it," she hissed. She shoved her phone into my face. The blue button on the screen pulsed. "Sign. Here." I pulled my arm away gently, but firmly. "This is a wedding." "Mom," I said, "not a bank. It is a family emergency," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "The bank is going to process the default on Monday morning if this isn't transferred. Do you want that on your conscience? Do you want to ruin us? Just sign the damn thing and we will leave." I looked at the phone. Then I looked at her. "I have one question," I said. My voice was low, but it was steady. "Do you want me to sign this because you need me to help Kelsey? Or do you need me to sign it to cover up the fact that you have been using my name for 10 years? Denise recoiled as if I had slapped her. Her face flushed a deep, ugly red. "You always make everything a big deal," she shouted. The volume of her voice shattered the bubble of privacy I had tried to maintain. Heads turned. The conversation at the nearest 3 tables stopped dead. Noah, who was across the room, turned his head, his eyes locking onto mine. I gave him a small signal. "Stay there." I did not shrink. I did not apologize. "I am not making it a big deal," I said, raising my voice just enough to be heard by the witnesses around us. "I am making it transparent." I reached into my bag and pulled out the manila envelope. I undid the clasp. I slid the papers out onto the high-top cocktail table between us. "What is this?" Denise asked, staring at the stack. "It is the truth," I said. I pointed to the first document. October 12th, 2012. A credit account opened at a furniture store in Hartford. I was in Boston. The delivery address was your house. I flipped the page. May 4th, 2016. A car loan, co-signed by Madison Hudson. I was living in Seattle. I didn't even have a car. Denise was staring at the papers, her mouth working silently. She looked pale. "And this?" I said, pointing to the transfer document she wanted me to sign. "This isn't a new loan. This is a consolidation of debt you racked up under my identity. You aren't asking me to help. You are asking me to retroactively consent to a felony." Gordon had walked up behind her. He looked at the papers spread out on the table. The dates, the IP addresses, the undeniable timeline of theft. He didn't look shocked. He looked defeated. "You knew," I said, looking at my father. He looked down at his shoes, unable to meet my gaze. Denise said it was the only way to keep the business afloat. He mumbled, "I just wanted to keep the peace. Maddie." I didn't want to fight. I felt a surge of pity for him. But it was cold pity. It was the pity you feel for something that has no spine. Your peace. "Dad," I said softly, was built on my back. You used your daughter as the foundation, so you wouldn't have to deal with the cracks in your own walls. Suddenly, there was a commotion at the entrance of the pavilion. "Wait!" A voice shrieked. It was Kelsey. She must have been waiting in the parking lot. And when the electronic signature didn't come through, she had panicked. She rushed past Mr. Henderson, who let her pass only because I nodded. She ran up to us, looking from the papers to me. She was wearing jeans and a hoodie, looking wildly out of place amidst the black tie elegance. "You are ruining everything," Kelsey cried, tears instantly springing to her eyes. It was a performance she had perfected over 3 decades. "Why do you have to be so selfish? Madison, Mom is stressed out. I need this." She reached for the papers, trying to swipe them off the table. I caught her wrist. I didn't squeeze. I just held it. "Stop," I said. I pointed to the signature on the document from 2012. "Look at the signature. Kelsey. Look at the loop on the N. You are the only person I know who writes like that. You forged my name while I was in a dorm room studying for finals, so you could get a TV." Kelsey froze. The tears stopped instantly. The victim act evaporated when faced with hard evidence. She pulled her hand back, looking at Denise for help, but Denise was staring at the dossier like it was a death sentence. The circle of silence around us was absolute. Even the music seemed to have faded into the background. I looked at the 3 of them. My mother, the architect, my father, the enabler, my sister, the golden child who never had to grow up. "I don't hate you," I said, and I meant it. The anger was gone. All that was left was clarity. I just don't belong to you anymore. I am not signing this. I am not signing into a life that isn't mine. Denise straightened up, trying to salvage one last scrap of dignity. "You are abandoning your family," she spat. "After all we did, we gave you life." I looked over her shoulder at Joan and Frank, who were standing quietly by the table, ready to step in, but trusting me to handle it. "Family isn't the people who force you to pay for their mistakes," I said. "Family are the people who pull out a chair for you when you are standing alone." I turned to Mr. Henderson. "Please escort them to their car." Denny opened her mouth to scream, to make the scene she had threatened, but she looked around. She saw the eyes of 50 strangers looking at her not with admiration, but with judgment. She saw the security guards stepping forward. She saw the dossier on the table, a paper trail that could lead her to a courtroom. She closed her mouth. She grabbed her purse. Come on, Gordon." They turned to leave. Kelsey followed, looking back at me with a mixture of hatred and fear. "Madison," Gordon said. He stopped. He looked at me, and for the first time, he looked like he actually saw me. "I am sorry. I believe you." I said, "I heard you, but I am not coming back." He nodded slowly. Then he turned and followed his wife into the dark. I stood there for a moment, watching them disappear. The tension in the air snapped, and the room exhaled. I turned back to the party. Noah was there. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just held out his hand. I took it. We walked onto the dance floor. The band, sensing the mood, shifted into a slow, soulful melody. I rested my head on Noah's shoulder, swaying to the music. I looked over at the table where Joan and Frank sat. Frank raised his glass to me. Joan smiled, a small, knowing smile that said, "You did it. For years. I thought this moment would feel like revenge. I thought I would feel a savage triumph in finally exposing them." But as I danced under the lights of the vineyard, surrounded by people who loved me for free, I realized it wasn't revenge at all. Revenge is about the past. This was about the future. I hadn't destroyed them. I had just finally, completely, chosen to live. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening while driving, cooking, or maybe winding down for the night? Please leave a comment below to share your thoughts and connect with others. And if you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Morgan Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share this journey with even more people. Your support means the world to me.